Hi, everybody. My name is Becky Stoll. I'm the Senior Vice President for Crisis Services for Centerstone. We're a multi state community mental health center. And for the company, I oversee our entire crisis continuum and work on our suicide prevention efforts. So, today I want to talk to you about a topic that I, for the past few years, have felt extremely passionately about, and it's an area I think we don't talk about enough when we're talking about the continuum and all the pieces that make up the continuum, and that's post crisis follow up. Um, for a long time, I think we've viewed and seen the crisis continuum be something that we think about sometimes as a singular encounter. And, we go in and we try to take care of individuals, whether that's through a call, a chat, or a text, or a mobile crisis visit, or if somebody walks into a walk in center, or they end up staying in some kind of residential facility like a crisis stabilization unit or crisis residential or respite. But I think that's evolved over the past few years, where post crisis follow up is really seen as an integral part and something we need to weave into all aspects of crisis services. So let's dive in a little bit and talk about what that can look like, and maybe some of the best practices that we should be utilizing when we do that. So, at our Centerstone, Tennessee operation, we've been very fortunate that we have received funding pretty consistently since 2014 to provide crisis follow up. And back in 2014, it was kind of a Shark Tank moment when the Blue Cross and Blue Shield Foundation of Tennessee came and said, what is something in the mental health space that you all could pitch to us that might transform lives? And we came up with lots of ideas that we thought could transform lives. And to be honest, at the last minute, we threw in something about doing post crisis follow up. And lo and behold, that was the one idea that we pitched them that they were willing to fund. And the idea was, if we did more connection with individuals after a crisis encounter, could we make sure nobody died from a suicide death? Could we get people connected to care in a better way and ensure that they were connected to care? And then, as a final thought, we thought, would it save healthcare any kind of money if that were to occur? At Centerstone, we're very fortunate that we have our own research institute. So we partnered with them and set aside funding in the pilot dollars that we were given to do just this. And we wanted to evaluate all of those items that I just mentioned. And what we found after a 1 year pilot, and you guys know, you've done pilots before, you're not really operating for a full 12 months. So this was probably really a 9 to 10 month by the time we hired staff and got our operations in order. What we found were really positive, and you can see that in the bold here. People that were enrolled were getting linked to services in a much bigger way than they had before. And even looking out 30 days, the majority of them were still staying connected to the care that they needed. We looked at emergency room return rates and saw they had gone from double digits down to about 8%. And we had no suicide deaths in that pilot. And then really wondering, would this save the healthcare system money? And lo and behold, it did. It saved, over $400,000 in just a matter of months. So we were very excited about this. Not quite having a parade down Main Street. It was 1 year of a pilot, and we worried about how we might continue this work. And lo and behold, we were able to not shut that program down. And we were recipients of 2 SAMHSA multi-year funding programs. The first was a Garrett Lee Smith, where we could focus this work on youth and young adult. And the second was a National Strategy for Suicide Prevention grant. And we really decided Okay, in that first iteration, we looked at some basic items, but might we expand our lens a little bit um, and look at more things? So not only were people engaged in care, not dying, but were they personally having better outcomes for themselves by being a recipient of this follow-up service? So we introduced, and you can see the administration length of time and some of the things that we looked at and the instruments we were going to use in this, some demographic information, the INQ, that we would start getting some self-report, the self-stigma of mental illness scale, the recovery assessment scale, and a suicidal ideation scale. And we took items out of those tools to really expand our look when we were trying to measure outcomes. So I'll share with you a little bit of just data that we saw um, when we started measuring this. So from baseline to 1 month follow-ups, in this slide, we were wanting to see a decrease, and we were wanting to see a decrease in risk factors. And this was around, on the left, perceived burdensome, and on the right, it was thwarted belongingness. And these were positive outcomes. We saw some significant reduction in people's burdensomeness feelings and their belongings. We saw some decent reductions here. The next thing we looked at, again, wanting to see decreases, were around suicidal ideation and if they have resolved plans and preparation around making a suicide attempt. And again, we saw good decreases from baseline over a 1 month period where people were feeling less suicidal and less likely around these plans and preparations for making an attempt. In this area, we were looking at growth factors. So while we wanted to see a reduction in the first two areas, here we were looking at this domination of people's lives around their symptoms of suicide and their feelings of hope and confidence in themselves. So in these measures, we wanted to see increases. And you can see the buckets that we looked at across the bottom. And thank goodness we did see increases in these. Personal confidence and hope went up. A willingness to ask for help went up. Being goal and success oriented was the smallest, but we did see an increase and not a decrease or a stable, data point. And I love this last one. People did not feel dominated. Their thinking was not dominated by the symptoms they were experiencing. And this was the area where we saw the greatest growth. And remember, this was over a 1 month period. So we felt like these were pretty good outcomes that we were able to achieve in a very short period of time. So out of being able to kind of refine this as we have followed this journey of what our follow-up program could look like, we started out with a pretty simplistic hamburger. It was ground beef. It wasn't the high end stuff. It was probably the hamburger meat you could, buy in the cheapest section of the store. But we always knew we wanted to refine this to the point that we're, serving a Wagyu steak at a high end steakhouse. I mean, that should be all of our North Stars, that we're constantly, looking and refining and trying to make this better based on all of the things that you learn as you're doing this work. You always want to tweak it and make it better and learn from the successes you're having and the mistakes that you're making. So we decided that all things considered, everybody that's receiving follow-up care, it's not the same for everyone. And this is another point I hope you really can take home as you go back and think about the follow-up you're doing in your system. I think for a long time, we have viewed people that encounter crisis as all kind of being the same. So you ended up being seen by a mobile team, or you presented at some kind of crisis facility, or you've called or chatted or texted in. And so that defined you as this person that had these issues. But once you really get into the weeds and you speak to people, you talk to people, you learn about what's going on. We saw there kind of were three buckets that people fell into as we talked to them during follow-up activities, and listened for what was going on with individuals, that everybody was not the same. And so these pathways that we could place individuals in, almost similar to the suicide prevention pathways that we have, and we have 3 different pathways in that area. These were the common areas that we felt like, excuse me, people had a need for. And if anybody's thinking, hey, you forgot to put a number 1 at the top for that pathway, I see that too, and I will fix that in future iterations of this. So the first pathway that we developed was the person really is in need of basic resources. It might be housing, it might be diapers, it might be getting connected to how to apply for medical insurance. They need employment. They need, a bus pass. That really, the ways in which they're trying to live their lives are inadequate because they don't even have access to some of the basic things that we all take for granted, and that we need to live just a basic life. The second pathway was not so much the person needs this thing, but they could use some referrals to get support around their own mental health, substance use, or other types of therapeutic programming. Is it peer support that would benefit them? But they need this linkage to services and not tangible things like in the first pathway. And then the third being, okay, this is someone who is really in a heavy way dealing with suicidal thoughts, potential suicidal behaviors. And we want to make sure, even more so than 1 and 2, that they are on our radar and that we understand that suicide is still a very big component of what is going on with him. And the primary focus here is keeping individuals safe. And so you might see, if willing, more frequent contact. Now, someone can be in all 3 of these at the same time. They can be, in 2, they can be in 1, they can move around as we stay connected to them. And I really view the follow-up component of crisis services, as long as someone is willing, we should stay tethered to them, because otherwise we only see people for very short periods of time. I mean, imagine crisis calls are, I think the average crisis call in the country is what, 15, 20 minutes would probably be considered, a little bit of a longer outlier. Chats and texts that come in, maybe 45 minutes to an hour. A mobile crisis visit, maybe a few hours. A crisis walk-in, somebody might stay there, anywhere from a couple of hours up to 23. Crisis stabilization, in some of the crisis residentials, you might be talking 3 to 5, or, in a residential setting, maybe, a week or 2. The less time we spend with people, in my mind, the more we do need to stay tethered to them so that they know immediately where they can call for help, especially as they're trying to navigate getting, all of the needs filled that they require to cycle out of this crisis episode, trying to address whatever needs they have and make their lives seem more like ones that they want to live. The other, kind of real aha moment for us, And I hate to say that's, been in the last few years. It really probably should have been something I think we all realize, way, way before, is not all crises are because somebody has a mental health diagnosis that they're living with. Um, there's plenty of people that we see in crisis services who have anxiety disorder, depressive disorders, bipolar, schizophrenia, substance use, the plethora of things that they can have going wrong. And maybe at that period of time, that diagnosis is not being handled adequately, and medications might need to be adjusted. The same way you think about people who have medical conditions. If you're someone that has diabetes, there may be periods of time where that's going better than other times, and you want to address that head on. And that's the reason for In the Pathways service connection, and keeping an eye on people who are having suicidal ideations to a significant level. So yes, all crises are not the same. And so we don't need to treat them all in the ways in which this is just somebody who's living with a mental health diagnosis. What we find more often in our crisis follow-up interactions is it's social determinants of health, and or being, a member of a marginalized population. Um, and this is not any research information. This is very anecdotal. But, when I ask and look at our current follow-up program, it's kind of a 70-30 split. 70 being, I don't have enough money for diapers. I don't have anybody in my corner who's supportive. I'm kind of alone, and I don't have a community. I need money for bus fare. I can't, buy my kids clothes. Or also, I'm part of a marginalized community. And that's a rough life for me to live. People that are in the LGBTQI plus population, or American India, Alaska Native, veterans, being part of that population causes a lot of stress for some people. So really, taking our 35,000 foot view of this and trying to look at it much more comprehensively, so that we're not just assuming everybody has a crisis event because of. So one day, I was on a call with some of our follow-up staff who were doing this work on the front lines. And, one of those individuals said, off the cuff, because we were talking about some of the difficulties of their work doing this on the front line, and sometimes individuals who we're working with during the follow-up phase having a hard time following some of the information around referrals and things like that. And this person said, I wonder what it does to your brain to go through a crisis event, like the biology of it. And we all, were like, gosh, we've never really thought about the science of it in that way. And again, because we have capacity internally to researchers and scientists, I was able to commission a literature review on what does being in a crisis event do to the brain. If anybody would like that, I think my email's at the end. I'm glad to send anybody who wants to see this literature review. I also can make sure the association has it, and you all can access that, because I would love everybody that provides crisis services to read this and see. But lo and behold, it was kind of a duh moment. Being in a crisis event does a lot to your brain. And I'm not going to I am not a scientist, but it's really fascinating. So when you look at things like the parts of the brain, like the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for our rational and higher levels of thought, when you go into a crisis, that gets turned off. And so you don't have access to that. Other things start happening. I mean, when you start talking about your hypothalamus That's telling your body how to preserve and regulate your energy. We can't really access parts of our brain that we need to. It becomes increasingly difficult to access pieces of our brain that we really need to during times of a crisis. And so these changes that occur are supposed to be very short and quick. I mean, imagine, you're walking down a path and a bear comes your way. Fight or flight, you've got to do that. So it needs to be very, very quick. But when you're in these crisis states and they are for a period of time, they're not just, oh, there's a bear in my path and what am I going to do? But it goes on for a bit. Or you have, multiple times of this, or it becomes more consistent. You can really see some things that happen into the brain. You can see that last bullet where you have some like shrinkage of your dendrites. And that increases an overactivity of the stress response. So you don't see the bear and then go, oh, well, he went that way and I'm good. It just increases the stress reaction that the person is having. So what happens when that happens? Well, because you start seeing all of this stuff, it starts impacting people's ability to regulate their emotions. And it also can result in this ongoing increased feeling of helplessness. And it's not, I am helpless. It's people's brain responses and all of these activities. And if you read the lit review, you'll see the very specific kind of nerdy speak about all of the very specific aspects of what it does to your brain. You can see some of that in that top cell. But at the end of the day, it can cause this feeling of helplessness, so that when we're now within 24 hours approaching someone and trying to say, hey, here's all these things you want to do. Let me give you all these names and numbers and resources, and you have something to write it down. People literally may not have the capacity in those first few contacts to do that. So it really does impact their ability to take in the information around resources and referrals. And here's where you can get diapers. And, oh, you want a therapist? Let me tell you how to do that. We need to cut people some slack and understand the brain chemistry and really understand in those first few contacts, we may be putting too much on people or expecting too much. And I'm not saying this is everyone. Some people may not have as much of an experience as others, but it's something I think we should educate the individuals on who are doing this work so that they're coming at it through a lens of understanding the brain aspects of this. We created a PowerPoint of all of this information in the lit review. And we also created some kind of what to do in the first call, second call, all of that for our folks who are doing the actual reach out to individuals. So if anybody has a desire for that PowerPoint to use for your staff and to train them, again, totally glad to share that with you all. And so you'll see again, what this is doing to the brain. Now, several episodes of acute stress obviously is worse. And it really will start impacting people's ability to manage and cope and regulate themselves. So the more times you're seeing someone in crisis, if you have people you see on multiple occasions, I think this kind of information becomes much more important for our mobile staffs and all of the people working in the crisis continuum to understand, so that we're approaching people from an understanding around what the brain has experienced. We took all of this information since we've been doing this for about a decade now, and we felt like we had a decent handle on what this looks like. So we did develop some follow-up guidelines that we just felt like were best practice based on what our experience has been. If you go to that link there, the best practice guideline, you can download a PDF version of it. And we also have a digital version of it. The last thing I'm going to run through in the last couple of minutes is one tool we have used at times in our follow-up services is an app that we developed. I know there are hundreds and hundreds of apps, but this is the one we customized within one of the grants we had. It's called Life Tiles, and it literally, as you see, are 5 separate tiles. And we have done, I think, a good job of employing this and using this. So you can click the Get Help Now. People can see their crisis management plan. They can immediately reach out to our crisis line. They can text, they can chat. Now it says 988 instead of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. In Tennessee, there's a statewide line. You could get to the Trevor Project. So this is I need help now, or I want to look at my crisis management plan that we've created with them. Then we have some tiles that allow individuals to check in. And all of the data around this dumps into a repository so you can see progress or lack of, but it gives you data points. So they can do sleep journals, they can take PHQ-9s. There are some self-assessments that they can do. They can journal, they have a medication diary. The mood check-ins, that far right with all the smiley faces is what the mood check-ins look like. Warning signs, and then their reasons for living. And every time they, the person using the app gets to pick which one of these they would like to use. And then every time they, for example, do a mood check-in, that's dumped into a repository so you can pull up and see how their mood is tracking over time. They also can set up reminders for themselves if they want to go, oh, yep, I'm really trying to monitor that I'm eating because my depression's been not great and that's caused me to not feel hungry. How they're feeling today. They can do sleep logs. They can do medication logs, personal hygiene log if that's been an issue for them. So they set up if they want reminders to go and log some of the data points that we're trying to collect for them. Then we have a tile around some coping strategies and things that they can use. You can see some of them here. People get to pick. So if you like coloring, you can go and do some things. If you like sounds, if yoga's your thing, videos, meditations, journaling, and people can hand select which one of these they find helpful. But we kind of capture all of those in one place so people are not having to Google and look up some of this stuff on their own. They also can reach out in real time to their care team and immediately say, hey, like I'm not feeling great. Or if they have a PHQ-9 that were to come in with a really high score on it, the care team would be alerted to that. And then they also in this can also look at their safety plan and things like that. And then the last tile is around resources. We do have the terms of use and privacy and things like that. But the one I like is they can click on a safer home and it shows you how to, do a sweep of the home to amplify some of the counseling on access to lethal means. So that was one we really liked having on there. So thank you guys for your time. I appreciate you letting me talk about all of us being a good wingman and helping people post-crisis and not viewing this as kind of a one and done. Hope to see some of you all in New York next week at the in-person event. If you're there, come and say hi. I'll look for folks too and glad to say hi. Do you see my email if you would like the literature review or you would like that PowerPoint deck we have on how to train the staff around what post-crisis can look like? Feel free to email me and I will shoot that right back out to you. So take care. Hope everybody has a wonderful day and we'll talk soon.